introduce the presenter. Yes, we are going to record it. And then I'd ask all of you, the people who are on the call, to actually introduce themselves in the chat so we know who we are, and maybe even put, you know, what landfill you're near, or what what group you're from, or, you know, I know we're not all Sierra Club folks. And then we'll have our presentation, and then we're going to sort of go around and, you know, like get a little bit better idea of what landfills we're, or waste issues we're around and near. And then, you know, by landfills for 5 minutes each, and sort of do a roundtable on what steps we want to, you know, take next, whether we're going to think about actually having some kind of working group for, you know, dealing with this whole issue. So, yeah, I take it you're handling the waiting room, Caitlin?
Yeah, I've been, it popped up, so.
Okay, cool. Okay, so our two presenters tonight are awesome women. Sonia Lunder is our senior toxics policy advisor for the Sierra Club. She leads work on a range of toxics issues, particularly health impacts to women and children. She has a master's degree in public health from UC Berkeley, where she studied toxicology and risk assessment. Prior to joining Sierra Club working in 2018, she spent 15 years working at the Environmental Working Group. She's worked on toxic substance policy reform and campaigns to improve the regulation of drinking water, pesticides, and air quality. And then we have Denise Trabick Pointer. She's with the Sierra Club Michigan chapter. She's a volunteer in toxics and remediation specialist. She's a chemical engineer by education and an occupational health and environmental manager by career. She has 42 years working in the chemical manufacturing industry. So these are the women who are going to tell us what we're dealing with. And so I'm going to let them take it away. And I see people are introducing themselves. So, and we've increased our number on the call. So basically, if you can introduce yourselves in the chat. And Deborah, I love your background. So anyway, so take it away, folks.
I have a presentation, so would you allow me to share my screen?
Yes.
And to use our time efficiently, I'll set a timer. I'm Sonia Lunder. Thanks for a nice introduction. Thanks for everyone being here. Denise and I work really closely together, and it's exciting chance for us to pull together a lot of thinking that we've been putting together related to persistent contaminants in landfills. And let's see, tell me when you, oh, I can share now. And I want to walk you through what we're thinking, and also leave time for conversation, and know that we're kind of describing a problem, and it's going to take everyone to fix that problem. And so, you know, hopefully this is just a helpful introduction, and we can move forward into collective strategy and advocacy to repair some damages. So we're taking this framing, thinking about water contamination risks from landfills, and that's both for the ecological values of clean water, but also for the fact that, you know, our waterways are connected. So if you're in the upper reaches of a watershed and you're dumping in persistent and toxic chemicals into your wastewater system and then back into your surface water, that pollution will have a heavy impact as it passes down the watershed to people who are drinking water and growing food with surface water downstream. So I'm Sonia and Denise, and you know, our agenda is to look broadly at persistent chemicals and the emissions from closed landfills, from active landfills, and to give you just kind of an overview of what's happening in terms of assessment, management, and prevention of pollution. So, over my years in environmental advocacy, I have seen both a trend toward being able to measure lower and lower concentrations of chemicals in the environment. And that's been really teamed with the idea that these really low levels of chemicals in our environment have an impact on us. So we have honed in on classes of persistent and mobile chemicals as a big problem for environmental cycling, both because in a lot of cases, we're focusing on chemicals that impact people's health at very low concentrations, but also because the way our systems of waste disposal are intertwined and connected, we have a bad history societally of taking waste and moving contamination from one place to another. An example being wastewater discharge to landfills, and then also landfills, seeping pollution into water. So this cycle becomes all the more apparent when we talk about PFAS chemicals, which we'll do in a moment. PFAS are an example of how persistent chemicals leach from, landfills in funny forms, in consumer products and in industrial waste and in fracking waste, and the mobility and persistence of the chemicals means that they can be traced into nearby waterways and into the environment. And we have now built a case of studying this mobility of chemicals from landfills into a broad downstream area. And when we're going to talk about PFAS chemicals in depth today for several reasons, but I wanted to just really frame this broadly so that that when we look at chemicals leaching out of landfills, there are a bunch of different classes of industrial compounds, including dioxins, synthetic hormones and pharmaceuticals, pesticides, flame retardants, dioxins and furans that have been measured and have been traced, making these cycles through the waste stream back into our bodies, back into our drinking water and our food supply. And PFAS become a very descriptive way of showing the gaps in the way we think about waste disposal, or we think about even chemical design and new chemical approval that is dooming us to some cycles of repeated contamination. So PFAS are Teflon chemicals. They're fluorocarbons. They have these really useful qualities of being non-stick, waterproof, greaseproof, and fireproof. And so as a result are used in dozens, if not hundreds of consumer products and a lot of industrial processes. And so I put the chemical formula on there to guarantee that you'll think we're smart people and that we know what we're talking about. But the core here is large chemicals with fluorine bonded to them, which have some interesting chemical qualities of being both inert and persistent, and also highly impactful to living creatures. And these slides will be available, as will notes and documentation to back up each of the slides for your information. Denise put in this helpful slide that shows that these are really unusual family of chemicals, a very diverse family of chemicals, but associated with lots of different types of harms to the human body. And I think it's just really, for someone, like me and Denise, who've been working on environmental toxicology for a long time, it's very rare to see chemicals other than maybe lead and mercury that impact so many different parts of the human body and in so many ways. And there's just an abundance of information linking human exposure and also exposures in more controlled laboratory settings to a variety of health problems. And also common health problems that would be difficult to trace back conclusively to PFAS exposure, unlike mesothelioma, which is a very unique type of cancer you pretty much only get when you've been exposed to asbestos. These are just these nondescript things, and having thyroid disease, no doctor in the United States right now necessarily would say, do you think you've been exposed to a lot of PFAS chemicals? And if you bring this up with a doctor, it may seem like they think you're crazy. So the other really important thing to know about PFAS chemicals is this concern has been growing over decades, but there is very little federal regulation of the chemicals, either as they're approved new chemicals, as they're used in products and industrial processes, as they're emitted into air and waterways, the TRI list and the toxics release inventory. So the baseline information about where and how the chemicals are used or emitted is incredibly limited and only really focusing predominantly on the chemicals that have already been banned from commerce. And that there's a lot of state regulation to address banning classes of consumer products, including bills, in the Northeast that we strongly support. there isn't regulation of the chemicals as hazardous waste presently. And so states and local governments and the federal government are kind of scrambling to address this problem. But in the meantime, there is very little clear, tangible regulation to back them up. In New York, you're ahead of the curve in having both hazardous substance listings, drinking water standards for a small number of the thousands of PFAS chemicals, some money to study landfills, release guidance values for 3 compounds, and then the state's been very actively suing the people who made PFAS chemicals, who made firefighting foams, the military, people responsible for point source contamination in New York, although that litigation hasn't settled. The other thing that really makes us focus about PFAS and is kind of contributing to this buzz is the idea that maybe by fixing the problems that led to this crisis of PFAS exposure and harm, that we can actually prevent future crises of this magnitude. We can make our environmental laws a little more harmonized and coordinated together. We can fix problems in terms of EPA approving new chemicals with very little information, better reporting on uses and discharges for highly toxic, persistent bioaccumulative toxins, take a closer look at consumer products and how they collectively contribute to our exposure and the unsafe levels of exposure in our environment to toxic chemicals. And as we're going to focus on tonight, wastewater, really call into focus the fact that our waste management technologies are very crude, very ineffective, and in many ways taking waste, concentrating it, and returning it back to us in our environment in ways that we really can't keep doing. So this is a map from the Environmental Working Group that looks at EPA's suspected industrial discharges of PFAS. Unfortunately, I don't see my slides now, but the landfills are on here, I believe, in green or purple. This is all in my notes and you'll see them. I actually haven't been to most parts of New York, so I have only a computer-based knowledge of the environmental conditions. But the point from here is that this is an online map. You can actually click on it and figure out what each of these dots represent. The fact is there are lots of industrial dischargers, and this is something that isn't adequately addressed in current regulation, and also means that there's a lot of different sources of impact to water systems in New York State. So we'll focus a tiny bit more on hazards from landfills, and starting with ground and surface water. Denise, when were you intending to kick over? Because I can share the mic with you at any point. Do you want me to go a little further?
Yeah, please, a 21 slide, I think.
Okay, I don't have slide numbers, so just come off mute and start talking when that happens.
All right.
Okay, so to orient you, this is looking at closed landfills and potentially, more modern landfills being a threat to ground and surface water. And so this is an example. We start with the hotspots in Minnesota at an industrial 3M site, where both the manufacturing itself, but also the waste disposal resulted in contamination of a major area of groundwater. Minnesota was kind of the point of the sphere. You can see the slide in the lower right is from 2018, a real assessment and understanding that the chemicals had migrated both from the manufacturing facility and from the disposal sites to move off site and to create a big groundwater plume. Now, I think we have a pretty good handle, relatively, depending on your state, on those places where PFAS chemicals were made and manufactured or are still made and manufactured. But it's settlement, illegal settlement and funding in Minnesota also led them to look more generally at closed landfills and find out that PFAS concentrations in these below or seeping out of closed landfills were exceeding health-based guidelines or water-based guidelines. And so you see those dots were all closed landfills that were studied, and the different color gradations demonstrate the amount of PFAS that were measured. So Minnesota is a little bit ahead of everyone else in terms of surveying this as a risk to water quality and the local environment, people who drink water from wells, people who drink surface water that's either treated or untreated or loosely treated downriver. And this is pointing out the fact that even in non-industrial areas, there are landfills that are contributing significantly and will be expected to continue contributing significantly to localized water threats. Denise put in this slide because New York State actually has funding and has done some assessment, and it's been a little bit prioritized or triaged based on places where they thought the risk might be highest. But as you see from the dots on the map, there are a lot of inactive landfills. And the next slide will show that they started with some of those that are the highest risk. So there is a caution in the report that this is this breakdown on the left is PFAS and PFOA measurements, with the orange being that they're above drinking water standards from the federal government. The yellow are above drinking water standards that's a little more akin to the New York State drinking water. Green is detected but below 10 parts per trillion, and blue is non-detect. So that's on the left is PFAS and PFOA. On the right is 1,4-dioxane, which is another highly persistent synthetic chemical that has no natural origin and is also really harmful to people in the low part per billion concentration. So slightly less potent than PFAS, but another place where we're seeing a signature of this industrial chemical out of landfills, out of wastewater treatment plants, and persisting in water systems in ways that can be threatening for downstream water drinkers. Is there anything you want to add to this slide, Denise?
No, but I think I take over in the next one.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, yeah, next slide. Oh, no, I don't. This one,
Okay.
you need to explain this one to me. too.
Sure, totally. I'll put slide numbers on next time. Sorry, people. So this also is then taking a look at current landfills, not just abandoned landfills, and knowing that the liquid waste from precipitation or from any liquid put into the landfill that leaches out and is in modern landfills collected, called leachate, does contain a signature of a lot of different persistent chemicals, human-made, that won't be broken down by sunlight or temperature. And this study was from the USGS, looking at 8 different classes of contamination, some that I introduced before. And they're measuring the loading, which is the grams per day, because some of this has to do with the concentration. If you have a lot of leachate, you might have less concentrated pollution. If you have a small amount, it might be more concentrated. So we look at loading, the amount of grams per day coming out of these landfills. And I put crude circles around them to show that these chemicals are also present in the wastewater treatment plant where the leachate is sent as it comes in the door, influent, and as it leaves, effluent. And so it's a lot going on in the slide, but it is to demonstrate that these persistent chemicals are pretty universally present, except for a couple of the hormones you see on the far right. That there are other sources into wastewater treatment plants. It's not just leachate, but in some cases, the leachate is a significant contributor. And we believe leachate is one of those places in the PFAS cycling in the environment where you actually could intervene, keep it out of wastewater treatment plants, knowing that wastewater treatment plants themselves do not remove PFAS in any measurable way. And actually then also their treated water or effluent goes back into circulation in the environment in a way that perpetuates the cycling of toxic chemicals. So I think of landfill leachate as a way we can kind of stop the cycle and intervene at a point where the wastes are a little more contained and concentrated. Shall I keep going? Okay.
This is your last one.
Okay, thank you. So this was another study from Florida looking at PFAS and PFOA in leachate, and it's to show you that there are some variability. This is a log scale, which I kind of hate doing for a lay audience because there's big differences, order of 10 difference between each line here. That's why you can see 1, 10, and 100 are all the same distance apart. But to show data that varies really widely, this is a technique that's used in scientific display. And the first 4 box whisker plots are different types of landfill: a general landfill, municipal solid waste, construction and debris. And then they actually looked at landfills or parts of landfills where they were taking incinerator ash, because one technology for getting rid of hazardous waste has been incineration, but because of PFAS qualities, this was actually revealing that that there was still PFAS and PFOA leaching out of ash portions of a landfill. So they weren't completely burned up during the incineration process. And then the two rightmost boxes that I drew a circle around were groundwater and I believe surface water that were collected near the landfill. So also showing that while it's at a lower level, that is, that there was leaching offsite from the landfill, and there's some variability as demonstrated by the box, but that there were concentrations, and in some cases, more than half of the concentrations were above the 70 parts per trillion, which is the EPA health advisory. So I will pass to Denise.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah.
She's great. We work well together. So getting down to talking about New York specifically and the 3 landfills that are of concern, they show on this map Seneca Meadows landfill, Highland landfill, and Hakes C&D construction and debris. So the purple icons are the landfills we're talking about, and then I've got some of the nearby wastewater treatment plants that receive the leachate. I got a couple of notes here just to add some color to this. The Hakes C&D landfill and Seneca Meadows landfills propose to continue to send their leachate to the Steuben County leachate treatment plant. And it sounds like that would be a great place to get rid of PFAS, but I looked at the processes and I guarantee you that leachate, the PFAS in the leachate is passing right through that system, and it goes to the Bath wastewater treatment plant. Highland landfill plans to truck theirs to various other wastewater treatments in the area, or treatment plants. So next slide. So New York has these just recently, I think the end of 2021, proposed these guidance values for human health and then for aquatic life. There's no connection as yet between these guidance values and the discharges from the wastewater treatment plants. According to New York, that's your state pollution elimination system permits. So they will ultimately apparently be regulated. Landfill leachate that goes to a wastewater treatment plant, as Sonia mentioned, that discharges to surface water will ultimately be covered under these guidance values as well. Excuse me. Data provided for Highland landfill indicates all of the results for PFOA and PFOS are above the human health guidelines here. And data from the Hakes C&D landfill also indicate that the leachate levels are for PFOA, PFOS are above human health guidance values. And just a side note is that Hakes includes some radioactive contamination at their site, low level, I believe. That I could find. Next slide. So liquid waste, and we got a picture of the Dunn C&D landfill. So next slide.
I wanted everyone to feel included.
Yeah, they have a problem too, yes. So the current options are landfill leachate is to dispose it at a wastewater treatment plant or via land application, which just gives me the shivers every time I hear it. But like I said, wastewater treatment plants, actually the biosolids that come out of a wastewater treatment plant are actually higher than the PFAS going in. And in a lot of cases, the longer chain PFAS tend to stay with the biosolids and they exponentially are higher. They also use deep well injection, incineration, and re-injection into landfills. So next slide.
Is there a delay?
Oh, I got it.
Okay,
Yeah, they manage their leachate through a IPP program. It's a very large program and that Michigan's been involved in since 2018, where the receiving wastewater treatment plant that gets the leachate from the landfill tells the landfill that you have to control the PFAS if they have PFAS in their leachate. And so some of these on the list, Kalamazoo, KI Sawyer, GLWA, and Port Huron, those landfills have to actually add granulated activated carbon to their leachate before they discharge to the wastewater treatment plant. And the MPART, which is the Michigan Action Response Team, they also have a landfills group, and that was established in 2019 so that they could ensure that leachate is effectively managed to keep PFAS from other media. And next slide. This is just to give you all an idea of what other states are doing. In Minnesota, Minnesota plans that if PFAS are detected in leachate from a waste disposal facility above their what they call intervention limits, and they're listed there for several of the PFAS, groundwater monitoring would have to be initiated at that facility to see if there are any impacts to groundwater. That's not proactive in my mind, but so hopefully they'll do some other proactive things. The next steps is that MPCA is working with landfills on alternate solutions to manage the leachate pre-treatment, like we do in Michigan, thermal.
did Denise freeze for everyone else?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, shoot. I could take over and then if she pops back in, we'll pretend like nothing happened. I think the point of this slide was that they investigated ways to evaporate the leachate or electrochemically treat it, and they realized that they were just putting the PFAS into the air. So that is a warning that I'm going to text Denise too. That these solutions that may work for volatile chemicals. Oh, you're back, Denise. And now you're muted. Zoom. I was just covering, Denise, the fact that that thermal evaporation and electrochemical treatments may just transfer the chemicals into the air. And so this is a warning when you're thinking about treatments that may work for more fragile chemicals that can be busted by heat or aeration, but that really doesn't happen with PFAS. Get us to Vermont.
PFAS complicated garbage juice, yes, state-only landfill.
I had to put in the slide with garbage juice just because it's such a description for leachate.
Yeah, it actually is fitting, but I'd never heard it before.
And gross.
The DEC will continue to investigate PFAS and landfill leachate to evaluate the impact of leachate on PFAS concentrations at wastewater treatment facilities and to evaluate treatment alternatives, which is very
Did she freeze again? Yes.
I freeze?
You keep freezing. Do you want to turn off your camera and just talk?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Happily.
We're on this slide with, other treatment. Oh, geez.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. So reverse osmosis. Reverse osmosis, PFAS can be concentrated, can treat PFAS in leachate. The complication with reverse osmosis is it's got reject water. And the reject water needs to go somewhere and it has to be managed. So it's because suspended solids and sometimes, and like most of the time, that has to be filtered prior to reverse osmosis. Did you want to say something about the concentrations?
Yeah, I just put this graph in because it shows that you can kind of push all the PFAS and related chemicals into the concentrate, which is the CONC, and get it out of the discharge, which is that very low bar. But I would point out that this is actually being used in certain parts of the Cape Fear River in North Carolina, where there's huge amount of industrial contamination for surface water that people rely on for drinking water. And then once they treat it and clean up some water for people to drink, they put the liquid waste right back in the river. So, you know, just to exemplify that a lot of times people are just really thinking about a very limited solution. And anytime we can get PFAS at least contained and kind of put away somewhere, that is kind of better than just trying to kind of dilute or shuffle or mix these chemicals. But kind of the more you look at disposal, the more you see these solutions that really are limited in scope or not fully effective. Let's see, I'm gonna do a time check too. Let's see, yeah, we're almost at 30 minutes, Denise. So what if we skip through some of these technology slides and just let you know that there'll be things we can share and we can follow up with more information if people have questions. Does that sound all right?
Sounds fine.
Yeah, so there's granular activated carbon, just it takes out PFAS, but also is really good for a variety of contaminants. It needs to be changed to keep its effectiveness, especially because what we want to remove is almost everything and down to the parts per trillion level. Another slide we had in here was an ion exchange resin, which is similar in that it can concentrate PFAS and other chemicals out of a liquid matrix, but then you end up having it clogged onto your resins or your filters, and then you need to figure out where to put those, and often they're put back in landfills, especially short of real hazardous waste rules. And just wanted to stop by saying, you know, clearly the solution for many of these problems is to not create the chemicals, to not use them in consumer products, and not create the garbage that's going into the landfill that creates this cycling of persistent and mobile and, you know, often deadly pollution. So we want to point to rules that would tighten up new chemical approvals, a law in Maine that actually looks to end the use of PFAS in consumer products and industry by 2030, and then bills that are under consideration in states that would actually just stop using the chemicals. And we've actually got some great support from wastewater treatment plants in Colorado for a bill that would ban PFAS in consumer products. We are still going to be dealing with landfill problems, even if we stopped making the chemicals tomorrow. And I'm really grateful for people focusing on landfills. And I wanted to say one more thing, which is that, you know, really appreciate this idea of coordination among communities, because when we're dealing with waste, we're often dealing with shuffling our problem from one nearer community to a more distant community. So when we look at the history of hazardous waste incineration, the history of landfill siting, the history of deep well injection, we're really looking at increasing exposures for marginalized people and marginalized communities, or this kind of NIMBY concern of just moving the problem slightly farther away from where you live, which is a human concern. But if we can stay coordinated and have these conversations at the regional level, the state level, and nationally, we can try to minimize the risk that we're just punting pollution to another place. Denise, any other kind of wrap-ups that you want to, or perspectives you want to share?
No, just thank you for your time, everyone. And I apologize for my technical difficulties.
Yeah, that is the story of Zoom. So yeah, yay, we met our goal of filling a half hour of kind of context and intro to a subject. We know you're thinking about landfills also much more broadly about a lot of other types of impacts, but I wanted to leave time for conversation, starting with any specific questions you have about the information we shared.
I did see there was a question in the chat. About carbon reactivation. It says carbon reactivation is just incineration. No?
It's a little bit different. It's done under with low to no oxygen.
Could you freeze again, Denise?
I think you might want to leave and call back by phone if you want me to text you the phone number, Denise.
Okay.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, it is one of those risk transfer questions where we're concerned that the chemicals are not destroyed through incineration or heating, and then would be just put back out into the air where they would settle back into the environment. So there, one other hope I have for the addressing the PFAS crisis is that we invent some new technologies that are safer, more contained, and that can destroy these really persistent chemicals like PCBs and dioxins in contained systems. And then you can actually check and make sure that that worked before the wastes are released into the environment, because incinerators can work in ideal situations, but they have periods of shutdown, startup malfunctions where they're not in their right conditions, and accidents. And then once that pollution is out into the air, there's no way to really collect it and recall it. So there is some really good innovation happening in using high temperature and high heat to destroy PFAS chemicals. And I think that, a goal that those would be more widely scaled out and be used at landfills, be used when we're dealing with stockpiles of chemical weapons or, banned pesticides or other persistent waste. But that is, a dream. And it's something that maybe, kind of in the works a little bit with PFAS chemistry, and thinking about also dealing with waste on site rather than shipping it, because when we know we're shipping it, we have shipping based problems and accidents, and we're probably also trying to send it away from us and towards where someone else lives.
Any other questions? Kareem?
Hey, my name is Karim Otakhan. I actually live in Long Island next to the Brookhaven landfill, which is the largest active landfill in downstate New York. And so our landfill is closing in 2024. And right now we have, because it's full, it's a 300-foot high landfill that is located in a DEC environmental justice area, located next to the community with the lowest life expectancy in all of Long Island. So we have 2 million people's garbage coming to our landfill. It's closing, and the solution is to just ship it upstate or out of state right now. And they are currently building New York State's largest waste transfer station across the street to accommodate this. We have, through 6 months of foils to the State Department of Environmental Conservation, I finally got PFAS testing from 2017 in the monitoring wells surrounding our landfill. And it's PFAS, the leachate has levels in the 1,000 part per trillions. We're talking about 70. The monitoring wells had 3 to 9 times, the downstream monitoring wells had 3 to 9 times the levels as the upstream monitoring wells. And since 2017, this was never retested. And we're having a real hard time having a public, as part of the permit renewal, we demanded that PFAS be part of the groundwater monitoring plan, and DEC said they would. And then we had the first round of monitoring well tests, and 450 pages, no PFAS included in it. And in the meantime, we found that the river, the Beaver Dam Creek, which goes right down below it, is contaminated with PFAS. In 2020, we found PFAS above drinking water standards in our groundwater, and we put $1 million GAC treatment facility on that public well. And it's interesting because our spent carbon from that well gets shipped to to Buffalo and burned, or gone through this reactivation process. So again, our waste crisis in Long Island is upstate's waste crisis. I want to say that I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I would love to connect with other people who are active on this issue across New York State as well. But I have a problem with just getting information. The state is not giving us information. The state is not testing. So I hear about all this other testing that's going on everywhere else. I hear in upstate New York when the PFAS is found in school wells and things like that. It's only because we demanded that they started recanvassing in private wells just in the last few years. And they found multiple wells with PFAS contamination above drinking water standards. And so I'm just, how do we get this information when the state, it takes 6 months to even give me a FOIL about 2017 data. It's very frustrating.
Well, yes, I can say that we've had the same trouble with Hakes. Rachel, do you want to talk about getting FOIL information?
Rachel, I think you're muted.
I know she's muted.
Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, unmuted. Okay. Yeah, my internet went out right before the Zoom, so I'm on the phone. But I've had a lot of problems too with DEC giving me information about PFAS. A number of landfills, they tell me they have no responsive documents, which I find extremely hard to believe since they have, it's been said they're studying all the landfills. And I did get 50 documents from the central office about some landfills, but it doesn't include a lot of other landfills. So I put these in a Dropbox folder. I would be happy to share what I got in terms of these 50 landfills. Most seem to be sort of in the Hudson Valley region. Not here in Region 8. The Hakes, the Region 9 DEC did give me the Highland PFAS test results from 2018, but they had these very high results. Haven't they been testing since then? What about more recent results? So I think it would be good for us to all put our information together and try to get more response from DEC. I don't know, why they seem to be hiding these results. So.
Yeah, we can get a Google Doc going with an index of what's in there so people can kind of look through and share information. It's a lot of things to review, but in a way that we can identify where we've received information and what to do with it. But I also want to thank you for raising a lot of important points about environmental justice, waste transfer, the ultimate fate of this, and point out that, there are some opportunities if New York is to win some settlements from the companies that make PFAS to try to enact some better controls over landfill pollution. And it's just a hard place to be. We're at the very end of the life cycle, but then we're concentrating, the liquid waste and putting it into our surface waters, crudely. There's a lot of steps in between, but that's basically the effect. And then taking the biosolids and often putting them on cropland. And so back into, the food that we're eating. So you're not wrong in any of your analysis or the urgency with which we need to try to address this problem. Would you like to move into the conversation a little bit more about kind of a coordinating group then? If we'll share a presentation and Denise and I are available for, questions related to PFAS and standards and measurements, and we're always happy to look at data. But it sounds like, one of the interests here is to talk about how broadly people can stay coordinated and look for opportunities to change.
Rachel, do you have your hand up?
I do have my hand up. I would, I think it's a great idea if we could have sort of a working group of involving people on different parts of the state who are working on these issues so that we can stay in touch about what we're facing and share information and, try to figure out that was very interesting about waste going from Long Island to Buffalo. And we have here in Region 8, some landfills possibly closing and then other landfills expanding. So to look at the big picture would be very valuable. And I guess, I think it would be helpful if we could just get a sense, are people interested in forming such a working group? Is that something people are interested in?
If you are, why don't you raise your hands?
Oh, Mary's got her hand
Do
up.
the thumbs up.
Okay, well, if you are interested, I'm putting my email in the chat, and you can email me your email, because I can't copy the chat. So you could email me at ecogreenwolf@gmail.com, and we will put together a list.
Rachel, I don't know if Rachel wants me to bring it up or if Kate does, but Rachel and I discussed using the already existent Waste Not, Want Not listserv, which was formed for the Hakes, Angelica, and Chemung County landfill stuff. So, and we can just use that until we get something else going, and people, so if people want to use that, that's okay. What do you, Rachel and I discussed this a while back.
Yeah, and Kate said that made sense. So I think, Mary, maybe you can put in the chat how people can subscribe to that listserv.
Well, they can just email me. I'll put my email in there. They maybe email both me and Kate in case something,
Yeah,
you know,
both of us. Yeah. And
We can download the chat too. I checked, so if anyone wants to put anything in the chat, it will be saved.
I mean, if people are interested, I'm happy to add them. We told the listserv that there might be an increase in volume soon, and nobody who's currently on the listserv complained. So I think they're all concerned. So,
Well, and some people emailed me that they wanted to be added to the discussion, but they couldn't be on tonight, so.
I did see a question in the chat, and I wanted to make sure we didn't skip over it, but Wayne Miller had asked, what is the New York bill that was referenced? Wayne, can you remind me again which, I don't remember specifically what was in the presentation, what was discussed.
I think I mentioned the bills that are looking to ban consumer products. So I think it's just a conversation at this point in New York.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak to that in that there are a couple of bills, different product categories that we've already got bills introduced in terms of PFAS and cosmetics and PFAS and apparel. In the past, we've gotten PFAS and firefighting foam passed and signed into law, and PFAS and food packaging passed and signed into law. So both of those product sectors have been are now law in New York. We are, like Sonia said, we are in conversations with some decision makers in New York about doing a larger category-wide piece of legislation, and we can make sure to keep folks in the loop. I know Gail and others in this group are part of those conversations. So we've been working with colleagues at NRDC and Earth Justice and other folks who've been trying to implement laws in other states and seeing what is working in other states, and you know, making sure that what we get done here in New York is a bill that is the best version of a bill that is actually enforceable at the same time. So that's what we're trying to get done here in New York.
Yeah, we're working on California. Minnesota had a bill that passed resoundingly through committee, Maryland. So it's definitely a trend and a good one.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
There are a couple of things. I live in Northern New York, and a lot of the older landfills have been closed. I'm not sure over what period, but one of the things that I think might cut down on the number of spots we need to look at is, when were these chemicals produced? Where were they disseminated the most? And how, frankly, can we determine whether or not we're wasting our time looking at landfills that may have been closed for 100 years? You know, just, and the other thing is, we have in many cases been able to look at concentrations of disease entities, both geographically and in terms of the general demographics. And I'm wondering if there has been an association of that sort, which also might tend to decrease. I mean, it's one thing to say we have a problem. The question is, where is the bulk of our problem and how do we concentrate our efforts on areas of concern?
I'll start, and Denise should fill in. I shared the link to the report that came out last May on the New York State Sampling Initiative. And so they did do an assessment where they looked at the age of the landfill and industries, and they did try to focus on those and start with monitoring at the landfills that seemed like they would be the highest concern. And there's some more detail in that link, and we can send it out with our presentation. Denise, anything you want to share related to that?
No, just, I think one of the questions was when were they started to be made? And I believe it was in the 1940, right, time period. She mentioned that I get 42 years with a chemical company, and chemical company was DuPont. So I've been around PFAS for a while, but yeah, these chemicals were starting to be made in the 1940 time period.
Okay.
I don't know if you can find out concentrations of where, but primarily the 3M in Minnesota and the DuPont plant down in North Carolina, Parkersburg, two of the biggest.
But you're spot on in that not every landfill may be high risk, and that it is important when there's so many of the closed landfills to really think about where the problems might be. We have been surprised by PFAS, even on the consumer end. Every week or two, there's some new article about a use that you never even considered before. I think the most recent was anti-fog spray that you put on your glasses. It just never even occurred to me. And so I think also in the industrial discharge level, there have been, some industries that have popped up where no one really thought that they might be used. But it's getting a little more clear in the last couple of years with so many different states doing these kind of surveys.
I think, Sonia, what was really hard for me to hear was when they said that it's in yoga pants. It's like, not in the comfy pants.
Oh, no, not that.
For theory meets practice, huh? Right there for you, Caitlin. Yeah, and I mean, these bills that focus on consumer products are really trying to push this idea of essential uses or avoidable uses. And there's so many things here that are, cosmetic or just a slight performance change. Ski waxes where, they're really appropriate for maybe elite racers when you watch the Nordic Olympiads, but for the rest of us, really not going to make a noticeable difference. And just no one's asking that question in the regulatory process. And I know it's hard when we're trying to focus on waste. There's so many opportunities upstream to limit the problem. And we need to call those into conversation, but we don't want to abandon this harder, more expensive, and more challenging conversation about waste disposal sites and the impacts that are happening there. My vision is better destruction technologies that are scalable, that are happening on site, that the industry lawsuits and industry funding is paying for, and that are designed to be lasting for years, because these landfills will be a source of PFAS in the environment that will have to be managed for decades. Now, I don't think people are talking about digging them up and moving them, other than maybe some of these urban places, but otherwise, systems that can be not super energy intensive, can be designed to work in small, operated without, explosion risks and other types of problems, and just sealing up our waste practices so we're not perpetually cycling harmful chemicals.
Mary?
Yeah, just really quick, and it's kind of tangential a little bit. Gail and Anne were successful in being able to speak today on a Department of Health. They're adding 6. There's currently doing 4 new forever chemicals, and they're MCLs, and also doing there's 16 more. There's like 23 new ones that they're going to be putting in new MCLs for maximum contamination levels, for those people who don't. So it's something else that we have to figure out what are the source of all of those too. But it was just at least one person in the DEC said the maximum containment level should be when it's, I don't know if you caught that, Gail, or if you were off the Zoom. I don't know if you got back on the webinar, but the one man said that the maximum containment level should be when it's perceived, when they found it. So that if it's two, if they can find it at 2 PPT, that should be what the maximum is. And I had to cheer him. So, but anyway, that I just wanted to say that they're working on that too. And it's something that's going to be run in another month. And people might want to get on it because they really messed up and weren't able to get public comments. I don't think the DOH is used to having public comment people. And I'd love to see them have make an arrangement to make it work and have 200 people on there. So anyway, that's it.
Gail?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, because Mary and Ann were both on that DOH call, and did you hear, because Peter asked me ahead of time before this, or at the beginning of the meeting, if did you get, and I didn't get it, did you get a date that they're planning to vote on those 4 PFAS MCLs? Did they
It's
announce?
not, I know it's not going to be until at least the next meeting.
Yeah,
They said
which
that
is-
they can't vote on it until they have more public comment. So, and I don't want them to hold off either, we need to get these regulated, but they said at least not for another month. So I didn't hear another date.
Yeah, okay, because that's what, I didn't catch a date, but Peter was wondering, because he does a blog, and
Yeah,
so, yeah.
yeah.
Also,
Thank
I
you.
didn't get to hear Ann speak because then Peggy was calling me, trying to get on the call, get on the Zoom. It was insane. I never had a meeting done that way.
Yeah.
Too
Yeah.
bad, Gail, because
Yeah.
I reiterated what you said, and Gail had suggested not only that the minimum contamination level for a single PFAS material should be 2 parts per trillion, but that if there are multiple PFAS contaminants, that the total PPT should be 10, which I thought was great. So because you do get multiples, they kind of come together. So I thought that was very good.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And it sounds like everyone who needs to be in touch will be, and we'll get a PDF of our slides as well as this link to the New York State report out. Who would that be to you, Catherine or Caitlin, to share with a group of registrants?
Probably both of us.
Okay.
Yeah, and this was recorded too, so I'll be sure to download that and we can include all of that.
Should we talk about scheduling a follow-up meeting, or should we be in touch by email and just schedule it through email?
I personally need to go and make some dinner for my people, so I'm going to jump off and just also, wish you well and promise that we'll take an eye out for developments in permitting and cleanup and technologies related to landfill, and make sure that we're always getting those back to your group as well. So
Thank you
I'm
so
going to
much.
jump and let you all decide what happens next, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you,
Uh,
Sonia.
Yes. Bill? Did I see Bill had a hand raised?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was any impetus or any activity around just banning these substances. That would make it all a little simpler rather than,
In terms of the PFAS chemicals?
right.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do sector-wide in consumer products. I know the next big issue too will be manufacturing use. Like the folks in Hoosick Falls, I think a lot of the contamination there was not so much that they were making things that contained PFAS, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gail, but I think it was more that they were using PFAS in the manufacturing process. So like to like make sure, for example, like a conveyor belt wasn't slippery or things like that. So like they weren't necessarily manufacturing anything with PFAS. They were just using it as like a helper, I guess, quote unquote, in the manufacturing process. So,
Right.
yeah. So that's a way that's something we're going to have to figure out how we're going to address, because that's not an intentionally added, piece to a product. So that, I think that's the next sector we're going to try to tackle. But the big, more comprehensive legislation in terms of consumer products is hopefully going to tackle a lot of the different sectors. And what we're hoping what that does is it drives the market to just move away from it in terms of using it in consumer products. So we're trying.
For instance, using it in things that are like food or cosmetics, where it's like close to your eyes and mouth, and I'm like, those would be the areas that would be like, hey, we got to shut this down quickly, because that's a major en route to getting it into humans.
It's in your dental floss, most dental floss. I'll put a link in the chat. We have on our Lower Hudson Group website, we found a page that has a list of products that do not have PFAS in them. So there's a number of dental flosses on there that don't have PFAS. So I'll look for it and put it in the chat. But yeah, when I found out it was in my dental floss, I was yeah.
I know, that was a real shocker.
I know Rachel had that question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
I was like, every time I eat like corn on the cob, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to use?
I know that I don't think we addressed Rachel's question, but I see Jane has her hand up as well. So I know we wanted to answer those two before moving on. But Jane, do you have a question?
Yeah, it seems that I read somewhere that PFAS is created with the use of a lot of products, even though it isn't in the product to begin with, that in the process of using it, it's created. Given that, and knowing how dangerous it is, that should be an even greater argument for taking it out as an ingredient within a product to begin with.
Sorry, say that again, the beginning part. What did you, it's
that PFAS is created in the process of using some products that don't originally contain it.
like it's a byproduct?
Right.
You mean like a breakdown of Teflon or something?
Well, not Teflon, but a breakdown of other chemicals. And I believe it was CCE that put that information out.
I think that might have actually been 1,4-dioxane.
Oh, you might be right. Thank you.
Because I do remember Adrian talking about that. And that is
You're right.
definitely a problem when it comes to cleaning products.
You're right. Thank you.
But it's still not a great chemical.
Is there
so
we can look up, if something is used has PFAS or PFAS type chemicals in it? For instance, I use a popcorn popper, and I put this paper thing in the bottom of it, and it's a pretty slick thing. And then I put the oil in, and I pop the popcorn. I'm wondering, does this thing have PFAS in it? That's one of those popcorn poppers that you put in the microwave.
mm-hmm. That I'm not sure. I'm sure there's a database somewhere that lists, those types of things, but it might be some. Well, I know Gail was saying that's the PFAS free things, but that I'm not sure.
I found this vintage fabric swatch that had a paper attached to it saying this is like protected from stains and water resistant, and it was like from the 70s or 60s, very wild prints. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with it because I'm sure it's full of PFAS and it's kind of cool looking. I'm thinking of I'd encase it in plastic, but we shouldn't have plastics either. So, but anyway, it's kind of neat. I'll take a picture of it and share it sometime. It's not neat, but it's something.
Well, it's
Outside.
yeah, it's kind of a a pan to our, better living through chemistry motto.
I want to say thanks to everybody and our presenters, especially. I learned a lot, but 8 o'clock is my off the screen time. So I'm going to bow out.
Understood. Understood. Well, yes, thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Please let me know if you want to be added to the listserv. And the waste not want not listserv, it'll be more for this kind of conversation.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any more questions, folks? Well, thank you all. This has been wonderful. And we will let you know when the next, well, we'll send out something to see when we should have our next meeting.
Great. And we'll send all the materials
And
out.
I guess I have one question. Do people prefer meeting in the evening or during the day? What's the best time to have a meeting?
I'm going to jump in here and tell you that 7 o'clock tonight, there was 6 meetings I could have attended, all important. So let's say not Thursday at 7.
This week at least, yeah. Okay.
So are there people that cannot do it during the day? But I suppose there's lots of things during the day too, I know, but
I see
I guess we can do it.
I see very little late afternoon, like 4 or 5. And a lot of times people are home or could be home by then. So, but we can discuss this online too. So, but that seems to, like, 5 o'clock seems to be a time I don't see. And it's usually before dinner. So, something to think about.
Yeah, 4:30, 5 o'clock. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Thank
my
you.
witching hour is coming up too, so.
Mine too. Thank
Thank you very much.
This
Thank
is
you.
my
Thanks, everybody.
today. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.